Alice never made her bed. That was the detail that terrified me more than any wildfire I'd ever fought. I stood in my dark, empty house, staring at sheets folded with military precision. Hospital corners my chaotic 11-year-old was incapable of making. My wife wasn't there. The porch light was off. And when I finally got Claire on the phone, she didn't welcome me home. She whispered, "Please, just stay home." I didn't listen. Have you ever ignored a warning that saved your life? Let me know below, because that choice changed everything. I shut off the engine and sat there in the driveway, letting the heavy silence of the suburban night wash over me. The wildfire season in British Columbia had ended abruptly 3 weeks early when the rains finally came, and they had sent us home ahead of schedule. After 23 years with Toronto Fire Services, the last 8 spent on wildfire deployments, I had never returned early before. It was just before midnight. I had driven straight through from Kamloops, 11 grueling hours, fueled entirely by the desire to surprise Claire and Alice. My daughter would be asleep, but I hoped my wife would still be up, reading in bed with the lamp on, as she always did when I was away. I grabbed my heavy duffel bag from the truck bed and walked to the front door. But the first sign of trouble stopped me cold. The porch light was off. It was a small detail, but Claire was a creature of habit who always left it on when I was deployed. I fumbled with my keys in the darkness, but the lock didn't turn. The door was already unlocked. My training kicked in immediately, shifting my mindset from tired husband to alert first responder. I set down the duffel quietly and pushed the door open. The house smelled wrong. Not bad, just stale and unused, as if no one had breathed this air in days. The living room was pristine, far too clean for a home with an active 11-year-old. Usually, there were shoes by the door or Alice's homework spread across the coffee table, but tonight the surfaces were bare. I walked down the hallway to Alice's room, and the unease in my gut turned into alarm. Her door was open, and her bed was made with military precision. Hospital corners tight enough to bounce a quarter. Her stuffed animals arranged in a perfect line. Alice never made her bed. I had to force her to do it every weekend before I left. And by Monday, it was always a disaster again. This bed hadn't been slept in for days. My heart rate spiked as I checked our bedroom. It was empty. The bed made. Claire's phone charger missing from the nightstand, and her slippers gone. I pulled out my phone and called her, the ringing sound deafening in the quiet house. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice groggy and confused. "Walter, what's wrong? Where are you?" "I'm home, Claire," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm standing in our bedroom and you're not here." "Where are you? Where is Alice?" There was a long pause, followed by the rustling of fabric. "You're home? You aren't supposed to be back yet." "The fires." "Where are you?" I interrupted. "I'm at my mother's." "Alice is here, too. We've been staying here for the past week." "Why?" I demanded. Claire despised her mother, Margaret Kingsley. They barely spoke. Margaret was controlling and manipulative, and Claire avoided her at all costs. "Why would you be at Margaret's?" "It's complicated. Walter, can we talk about this tomorrow? It's late." "What time did you put Alice to bed?" "Around 9. "Why?" "I'm coming there right now." "Walter, no. Please just stay home tonight and we'll talk in the morning." I hung up, my blood running cold. Something was very wrong. Claire would never voluntarily stay at her mother's house in Aurora, 45 minutes away. I got back in my truck and drove. The roads empty at this hour, my mind racing with dark possibilities. I made the trip in 38 minutes, arriving at Margaret's sprawling estate with a sense of dread that was harder to shake than any fire I'd ever fought. Margaret's house was a sprawling, imposing structure set far back from the road, an architectural display of old money that backed right onto the dark, dense woods of the conservation land. The house was almost entirely dark, save for a single, unblinking light in an upstairs window that watched me like a yellow eye. I parked my truck haphazardly on the street, refusing to give her the dignity of using the driveway, and walked up the long, winding path. The silence here was different than at my house. It was heavy, judgmental. I rang the doorbell and held it down, listening to the chime echo deep within the cavernous home. Nothing happened for a long moment, and I was about to kick the door in when the entryway light finally flickered to life. The door opened, revealing Claire. She was wrapped in a silk robe, clutching the lapels tight against her throat. Her hair, usually so neat, was a tangled mess, and in the harsh light of the porch, she looked gaunt. Her cheekbones were too sharp, and there were dark, bruised circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She looked at me not with relief, but with terrified confusion. "Walter?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here? It's almost 1 a.m. "I want to see Alice," I said, stepping forward. My voice was low, but it left no room for argument. "She's asleep," Claire said quickly, moving to block the doorway. Her hands were shaking. You can see her in the morning? Please, Walter." I didn't have time for this. I pushed past her gently but firmly, stepping into the foyer. "Alice," I called out, my voice booming off the marble floors. "Walter, stop! You're going to wake my mother." Claire grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. There was real fear in her eyes, panic that bordered on hysteria. "Please, don't do this." "Not now." I looked down at my wife, really looked at her, and felt a pit open in my stomach. She looked haunted, like a shell of the woman I had left 3 weeks ago. "What is going on here, Claire?" I asked. Before she could answer, a voice cut through the air like a cracking whip. "David, what an unexpected surprise." I looked up. Margaret Kingsley stood at the top of the sweeping staircase. At 72, she was rail-thin, her white hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun that pulled the skin of her face taut. Despite the hour, she was fully dressed in slacks, a cardigan, and a string of pearls, as if she never slept, only waited. "Where is my daughter? Margaret?" I demanded. "Alice is perfectly fine," Margaret said, descending the stairs with a slow, deliberate cadence. "She is sleeping in the guest cottage out back. I thought it would be good for her to have her own space. She's at such an important age. You know, independence is crucial for character development." The guest cottage. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a cottage. It was a converted barn about 100 meters behind the main house. I had been there once, years ago, to help move some furniture. It was uninsulated, drafty, and essentially a wooden box. "You put her in the barn?" I asked, incredulous. "It's November." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and headed for the back door, moving fast. "Walter, wait!" Claire cried out, starting after me. "Claire, let him go." Margaret's voice stopped her in her tracks. It was sharp, commanding. If he wants to disturb Alice's sleep and upset her progress, that is his choice. I ignored them both. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the utility drawer in the kitchen, instinct telling me I would need it, and burst out the back door. The temperature had dropped significantly since sunset, hovering just above freezing. I could see my breath pluming in the air before me. The backyard was a vast expanse of darkness, but I could make out the silhouette of the cottage in the distance. It was completely dark. No porch light, no glow from a window. I crossed the manicured lawn, my boots crunching loudly on the frost-covered grass. As I got closer, a sense of dread seized my chest. I reached the cottage door and grabbed the handle. It didn't turn. I shone the flashlight on the latch. It was padlocked. From the outside, rage, pure and blinding, flooded my system. "Alice!" I shouted, pounding on the heavy wood. "Alice, it's Dad." Silence. Then, a small, muffled sound. "Alice, honey, can you hear me? Dad?" The voice was weak, hoarse, and sounded terrifyingly small. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Dad, I'm so cold. I yanked on the padlock, but it was solid steel. I looked around frantically, sweeping the flashlight beam across the yard until it landed on a woodpile near the side of the structure. I sprinted over and grabbed a splitting maul, a heavy axe-like tool used for chopping firewood. I ran back to the door. Stand back. Alice, get away from the door. I roared. I swung the maul with every ounce of strength I possessed. Metal sparked against metal. I swung again. And a third time. The hasp gave way, the wood splintering. I threw the door open and rushed inside. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness of the single, windowless room. It was maybe 4 by 6 meters. There was no furniture, no heat source, no light bulb. In the corner, curled up on a bare, stained mattress on the floor, was my daughter. She was wearing only her thin cotton pajamas. No blanket, no pillow. Her lips were blue, and she was shaking so violently her teeth were chattering audibly. I dropped the maul and scooped her up into my arms. She felt like a block of ice. I unzipped my heavy firefighter's jacket and wrapped it around her, pulling her tight against my chest to share my body heat. It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you. You're safe now, I murmured into her hair. She wasn't sobbing. She was just letting tears run silently down her freezing face. I tried to be good. Dad, she stammered, her voice hitching. I really tried. But grandmother said I had too much spirit. She said disobedient girls need correction. How long have you been out here? I asked, my voice trembling with fury. Since yesterday morning. She took my blanket away the day before that. She said comfort makes children weak. I felt something break inside me then. A cold, terrible resolve that was far more dangerous than the fire I fought for a living. I carried Alice out of that freezing hellhole and walked back toward the main house. Margaret was standing on the back porch, watching us. Claire was beside her, wringing her hands. Put her in my truck, I told Claire as I approached, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Hollow and flat. Turn on the heat. Wrap her in the emergency blanket behind the seat. Claire moved immediately, rushing down the steps to take Alice from my arms. Our daughter clung to her mother for a brief second, then went limp, too exhausted to hold on. Claire was crying now, silent sobs shaking her shoulders as she carried Alice toward the driveway. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at Margaret. What have you done? I asked. She smiled. She actually smiled, a thin, superior curling of her lips. I have been teaching your daughter the discipline her mother failed to instill. Claire was always too soft, too emotional. It's why she made such poor choices in life. Alice was heading down the same path. She is 11 years old. Walter, the perfect age for correction. Any older, and the damage is permanent. You locked my daughter in an unheated shed in November for 12 hours, I said, stepping up onto the porch. That isn't discipline. That's torture. Hardly. Margaret scoffed. I've been consulting with an expert, Dr. Thomas Thorne, a renowned child behaviorist. He runs a specialized program for difficult children. He recommends isolation periods of up to 72 hours for truly defiant subjects. I was being quite lenient. I took a step toward her. She didn't flinch. If you ever touch my daughter again, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, if you ever even speak to her again, I will. You'll what, Walter? She interrupted, her eyes gleaming with malice. I'm her grandmother. I have rights. And Claire brought Alice here voluntarily. She signed the consent forms for Dr. Thorne's program. Legally, you have no standing here. I looked past her to where Claire was buckling Alice into the truck. Even in the darkness, I could see the guilt radiating off my wife. Claire understands that sometimes a mother must make difficult choices for her child's own good. Margaret continued, her voice calm and measured, as if explaining simple math to a child. Alice was becoming rebellious, talking back, questioning authority. These are symptoms of a larger problem. Dr. Thorne has a facility where children receive the intensive intervention they need. It costs $32,000 annually, but I am paying for it. All Claire had to do was sign. Not while I'm still breathing. I spat. You are deployed 8 months of the year. Walter, Margaret sneered. You have no idea what Claire deals with. She is drowning, and I have thrown her a lifeline. I looked at this woman. This monster in pearls. One last time, I realized then that words meant nothing to her. She was incapable of feeling what I felt. I turned my back on her and walked to my truck. Alice was wrapped in the silver emergency blanket, her teeth still chattering. Claire was sitting in the back seat with her, tears streaming down her face, trying to rub warmth into Alice's arms. Get out, I told Claire. Walter, please. Get out of my truck, Claire. Now, she looked at me, saw the look in my eyes, and didn't argue. She climbed out of the back seat, standing alone on the asphalt. I got in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Claire standing in the driveway, illuminated by the harsh porch light, falling to her knees as her mother watched from the shadows. I didn't turn back. I took Alice to the nearest emergency room, my truck tearing through the quiet streets as if the devil himself were chasing us. They admitted her immediately for observation, hooking her up to fluids and wrapping her in heated blankets to treat her for mild hypothermia and severe dehydration. A social worker arrived within the hour, a tired-looking woman with a clipboard who listened quietly as I told them everything. The unheated cottage, the padlock, the lack of food and water. They called the police, but the officer who took my statement, while sympathetic, was frustratingly frank about the legal reality we were facing. We can investigate, Mr. Winters, he said, shifting uncomfortably in his uniform. But if your wife, as a legal guardian, consented to the grandmother providing care, and there's no evidence of physical abuse beyond the isolation, this becomes a civil matter. It gets very murky when there is a custody dispute involved. I stared at him, disbelief clouding my vision. There is no dispute, I growled. She was locked in a freezing room for 12 hours in November. That isn't parenting, that's endangerment. The officer promised to document everything, but warned me that without signs of physical assault, charges were unlikely to stick immediately. I sat by Alice's hospital bed all night, watching the heart monitor trace the rhythm of her life, listening to her fitful sleep as she occasionally cried out in fear. I wasn't sure if her tremors were from the lingering cold or the trauma, and the uncertainty made me feel a kind of helplessness I hadn't felt since my rookie year fighting fires. At 9 a.m., just as the sun was beginning to bleed through the hospital blinds, my phone rang. It was Claire. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering, my voice gravelly from silence and rage. Rebecca, I said, using her full name, something I only did when things were beyond repair. David Walter. She stammered, correcting herself, her voice thick with tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know she would lock our daughter in an unheated room. I swear to you, I didn't know. I rubbed my eyes with my free hand. What exactly did you think was going to happen when you signed Alice up for this program? Claire, did you think they were going to bake cookies? She took a shaky breath. It's not like that. Dr. Thomas Thorne's program is legitimate. He's a licensed psychologist. The facility is accredited. It's for children with severe behavioral issues. Alice doesn't have behavioral issues. I snapped, keeping my voice low so as not to wake my daughter. She's 11. She's been difficult lately because I'm away, but that's it, my mother said. Claire started, then stopped. Patricia, Margaret said that if we intervene now, we could prevent Alice from making the same mistakes I did. Getting pregnant young, marrying someone she didn't approve of, giving up a career. I closed my eyes, the exhaustion washing over me. And you believe that? You let her poison you against your own daughter? I don't know what I believe anymore, Claire sobbed. I'm alone all the time. Walter. When Margaret offered to help, when she said she'd pay for the program, I just wanted help. The mention of money made my ears ring. How much has she paid you, Claire? Silence stretched on the line. How much? I demanded. $32,000 so far, she whispered. She's been sending me monthly payments. The program was supposed to start in January, but she wanted Alice to do preliminary sessions first. The preliminary sessions involved locking her in a freezing barn. I said, my voice cold as ice. I want a divorce. The line went completely silent, followed by a sharp intake of breath. What? No. Walter, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I was manipulated. You sold our daughter to your mother for $32,000. I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I didn't sell her. I was trying to get help. She has hypothermia. Claire. She is traumatized. You found her last night. You saw where she was, and you left her there because your mother told you to. You're her parent. You're supposed to protect her above everyone else. I hung up the phone before she could say another word, severing the connection and, effectively, our marriage. Alice woke up around 8 a.m. The doctor came in and examined her, declaring her stable enough to be released after lunch if her temperature held. Dad? Her voice was small, fragile. Yeah, honey, I'm here. Is Mom coming? I don't know. I lead. I don't want to see her, Alice said, staring at the ceiling. Or grandmother. I don't ever want to go back there. You don't have to. I promised, taking her small hand in mine. She was quiet for a long while, her brow furrowed in thought. Dad, there's something else. What is it? In grandmother's house. In her office, Alice whispered, her eyes wide. There's a filing cabinet. I saw it when I went to use the bathroom once. The door was open. It has files. Lots of files with names on them. I leaned in closer, listening irrelevant of the nurse checking the IV drip. What kind of names? Other kids' names, Alice said. I recognized some from school. And there were photos. I felt the blood drain from my face. What kind of photos? Alice? Kids crying, she said, her voice trembling. They were in rooms like the cottage. Empty rooms. And there were dates and times written on them, like records. And numbers. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Margaret Kingsley wasn't just abusing her granddaughter, she was keeping a trophy case. I called the police officer back immediately. He returned to the hospital an hour later, looking weary. Mr. Winters, I understand you're upset, he began, but we cannot search a private citizen's property based on what an 11-year-old child claims to have seen while sneaking around a house. She's keeping records, I insisted, my voice rising. Photos of children being abused. This isn't just about Alice anymore. There are other kids. Did Alice say the children in the photos looked injured? Were they being actively harmed in the images? They were crying. They were locked up. That's not enough for a warrant. Sir, the officer said firmly. Look, I'll file a report. If there's a pattern of complaints against Margaret Kingsley or this Dr. Thomas Thorne, it will help build a case. But right now, we don't have probable cause to kick down the door of a prominent community member. He left, leaving me sitting there with the crushing realization that the law was not going to help us. I looked at Alice, small and broken in the hospital bed, and knew I had to go outside the law. After the police officer left, I sat in the hospital chair, staring at the linoleum floor until the patterns started to swim before my eyes. The law had failed us. It was a bitter pill to swallow for a man who had spent his life in uniform, serving the public trust. But if the law couldn't protect my daughter, I would find someone who could. I walked out to the hallway and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Frank O'Connor answered on the second ring. He was a retired fire captain who had pivoted to private investigation after blowing out his knee on a 3-alarm blaze. At 68, he was still built like a bear and sharp as a tack. Walter, he grunted, his voice gravelly. I heard you were back early. Everything okay? No, Frank, I said, my voice low. I need help. The kind of help I can't ask the department for. Frank met me at the hospital 2 hours later. He listened without interrupting as I poured out the entire story. The unheated cottage, the padlock, Margaret's arrogance, and Alice's terrifying claim about the filing cabinet. When I finished, he leaned back, his expression grim. I've heard of Dr. Thomas Thorne, Frank said, rubbing his jaw. There have been whispers for years. Rich families send their troubled kids to his facility for behavioral correction. Some of those kids come back different, quiet, submissive, like the light's been turned off inside them. And a few never come back at all. What do you mean, never come back? I asked, a chill running down my spine. Officially, they ran away, or got transferred to boarding schools in Europe or Asia. But the rumors say otherwise. Nothing provable, just smoke. But where there's smoke, he trailed off, looking at me meaningfully. I need to know what's in that filing cabinet, Frank. Alice said there were records. Frank looked at me for a long, heavy moment. Walter, you know what you're asking me to do. Breaking and entering. Burglary. If we get caught, it's not just jail, it's the end of your career. I don't care, I said. I care about stopping this. Frank hid, then nodded slowly. I'll need a few days to set it up. Can you keep Alice safe until then? Yes. Alice was discharged that afternoon. I took her home. Our home, not the prison Margaret called a house. Claire called 47 times that first day. I didn't answer a single one. On the third day, Frank called. I'm in, he said simply. Margaret Kingsley is out of town. She flew to Montreal this morning for a charity gala. I'm parked down the street from her place now. Walter, if we're doing this, it has to be tonight. I'm on my way, I said. I needed someone I could trust implicitly to watch Alice. So I called my sister, Laura. She came over within the hour, bringing her 2 kids to create a distraction. I told her I had to run an urgent errand for the union. I kissed Alice on the forehead, promising I'd be back soon, and drove to Aurora with a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. When I arrived, Frank had already bypassed the security system and picked the lock on the back door. The house was silent and dark, a mausoleum of secrets. We moved through the shadows, our footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. Frank led me straight to Margaret's office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. The filing cabinet stood against the wall, just as Alice had described. Frank made short work of the lock, and the drawer slid open with a smooth, well-oiled glide. Inside, there were 47 files. 47 children. We started pulling them out, one by one. Each file contained photos, medical records, and behavioral reports. The photos made me sick to my stomach. Children in isolation rooms similar to the one Alice had been in. Children crying, children who looked utterly broken. But it was the financial records in the back of the drawer that revealed the true horror of the operation. Margaret Kingsley wasn't just a misguided grandmother, she was a recruiter. There were invoices showing referral fees paid to her by Dr. Thorne. 100 million, 500 for every child she successfully enrolled in his program. She was selling children, capitalizing on her social connections to convince desperate parents to hand over their kids. Then I found the correspondence. Emails between Margaret and Dr. Thorne discussed difficult cases and non-compliant subjects who required permanent solutions. One email, dated just 2 days prior, stopped my heart. The Kingsley girl shows promise. It read, high intelligence, strong will. These traits are valuable in the secondary market. If the mother proves uncooperative or wavers, the subject can be redirected to the alternative program. Our overseas partners are particularly interested in English-speaking girls aged 10 to 12. Jesus Christ, Frank whispered, reading over my shoulder. She was going to ship Alice overseas. "We need to call the police now," I said, my hands shaking with rage. "We can't," Frank hissed. "This is an illegal search. Fruit of the poisonous tree. None of this is admissible in court. If we call them now, a good lawyer will get the evidence thrown out, and Margaret walks free. Then what do? "We photograph everything," Frank said, pulling a high-resolution camera from his bag. "Every page, every photo, every email. We document the hell out of this. Then we put it all back, exactly as we found it. Leave no trace. And we find someone who can get a warrant legally." We spent 3 hours photographing the contents of that cabinet. When we were done, we reset the room with forensic precision. Back in my truck, parked a safe distance away, Frank made a call. "Susan, it's Frank O'Connor. I need a favor. The big kind. I have information about a child trafficking ring involving high-profile figures. I can't tell you how I got it, but I can point you in the right direction. Tomorrow morning." He hung up and looked at me. "Susan Chang. She's an investigative journalist who's done major exposés on institutional abuse. If anyone can get this story out without burning the evidence, it's her." We met Susan the next morning at a Tim Hortons in Newmarket. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who wasted no time with pleasantries. I handed her the printed copies of the photos Frank had taken. She flipped through them in silence, her expression darkening with every page. Finally, she looked up, her eyes hard. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Does it matter?" Frank replied. "If I'm going to risk my career and my paper's reputation, I need to know it's real," she countered. "I need to know it will hold up." I leaned forward. "It's real. My daughter is in one of these files. They were going to send her away. This woman, Margaret Kingsley, is recruiting for them. I told her everything. The barn, the fees, the emails." Susan listened, taking frantic notes. "I'll need to verify everything independently," she said finally. "Talk to other families, find a pattern, get official records to corroborate the financial data. This is a months-long investigation." "We don't have months," I said, slamming my hand on the table. "There are children in that facility right now. My daughter was almost one of them." Susan looked at the photos again, then at me. "Then we do both. I publish a preliminary piece to force the authorities to act. Create enough public pressure that they can't ignore it. Then I continue investigating for the full expose. But I need to know you're ready for the fallout. Once this starts, there's no going back. Burn it down." I said, "Burn it all down." Susan Chang published her first article 3 days later. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Careful, meticulously sourced, and absolutely devastating. She didn't use the stolen photos as evidence, but she used them as a roadmap, tracking down 6 other families who had enrolled their children in Dr. Thomas Thorne's behavioral correction program. 3 of those families agreed to speak on the record about their regrets, describing how their vibrant children had returned home as empty shells, traumatized and submissive. One 14-year-old boy had attempted suicide twice since leaving the facility. The article explicitly named Margaret Kingsley as a recruiter, quoting from emails Susan had obtained through a Freedom of Information request to the licensing board that oversaw Dr. Thorne's practice. The response was immediate and explosive. The College of Psychologists of Ontario launched an emergency investigation, suspending Dr. Thorne's license pending a hearing. The Aurora Police Department, publicly embarrassed by the media storm and the implication of negligence, finally obtained a warrant to search Margaret's house. This time, they didn't need a child's testimony. They had the pressure of the entire province watching them. They found the filing cabinet exactly where Frank and I had found it. All 47 files, the photos of weeping children, the medical records detailing isolation therapy, and the damning financial ledgers were seized. The evidence was now legal, admissible, and undeniable. Dr. Thorne's facility was raided by a tactical unit 2 days later. They found 31 children inside. 8 were from Ontario, including the son of a prominent city councilor, while the rest had been shipped in from across Canada and the United States. The conditions inside the facility were horrific. What was marketed as a high-end boarding school was crass, in reality, a prison. There were isolation cells with no heat, insufficient food rations used as punishment, and evidence of systematic psychological abuse designed to break the children's wills. However, the head count didn't match the records. 3 children were missing. The seized files suggested they had been transferred to partner facilities overseas. Interpol was immediately notified, escalating the case to an international investigation. Margaret Kingsley was arrested at her home. I watched the footage on the evening news, a grim satisfaction settling in my gut as I saw her being led out in handcuffs, shielding her face with a designer scarf. She was charged with 23 counts of child endangerment, 6 counts of conspiracy to traffic children, and 14 counts of fraud. The bail was set at $500,000. She posted it in 6 hours, walking out of the station with her lawyers flanking her like a phalanx. Dr. Thorne was not so bold. He fled the country hours before the raid. Intelligence reports placed him in Costa Rica, where he immediately began fighting extradition. The legal battle was just beginning, but for me, the war had moved to a different front. Claire called me the night Margaret was arrested. I was sitting in the living room, watching Alice sleep on the couch because she was terrified to be alone in her room. I didn't know. Claire sobbed into the phone, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Walter, I swear to you, I didn't know about the trafficking. I thought it was a behavioral program. I thought she was trying to help." I held the phone tight, my knuckles white. "You knew about the cottage, Claire," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You knew she locked our daughter in a freezing shed. She told you it was isolation therapy, and you accepted that. You let her convince you that I was being overprotective, and you believed her." I continued, cutting off her stammering protests. "She's my mother, Walter. She's a pillar of the community. She volunteers at the hospital. She's on the library board. How was I supposed to know she was this?" "You were supposed to know because you are a mother," I said. "You could have trusted your own judgment. You could have protected our daughter. Instead, you tried to protect her from making your mistakes." "And what mistakes were those? Claire, having a family, marrying me?" There was a silence on the line, heavy and suffocating. "She told me every day that I was wasting my potential," Claire whispered, "that I had trapped myself. That Alice was showing the same defiant streak and needed correction before it was too late. I was scared." "Walter, so you let her abuse our daughter?" I said, the finality of the statement hanging in the air. "I want Alice back," Claire said quietly. "No," I replied. "She's my daughter, too. You gave up that right when you left her in that cottage. You gave up that right when you let your mother put a price tag on her. Walter, please. I'll do anything. Therapy. Divorce my mother. Testify against her. Anything. It's too late. Claire." I hung up. The divorce took 8 agonizing months. Claire fought for joint custody, claiming she had been a victim of manipulation. I fought for sole custody, armed with hospital records, police reports, Susan's articles, and Claire's own admission that she had known Alice was in the cottage. The judge reviewed everything with a stony expression. The ruling was decisive. Full custody was awarded to me. Claire was granted supervised visitation, 2 hours every Sunday at a court-approved family center. It was a crushing blow to her, but I felt only relief. Alice was safe. Margaret's trial was set for the following year, but the investigation into the trafficking ring continued. Susan Chang didn't stop digging. Working with international authorities, she managed to track down 2 of the 3 missing children. They had been recovered in Thailand, held at a facility that fronted as an international school for troubled youth. The children were traumatized, malnourished, but alive. However, the 3rd child, a 9-year-old boy named Ethan, was never found. The trail went cold in Bangkok. Every time I looked at Alice, now safe in our home but still jumping at shadows, I thought of Ethan. I thought of his parents, who had likely been manipulated just like Claire, and who were now living a nightmare with no end. Susan published her full exposé 9 months after her first article. It won a national newspaper award. But more importantly, it sparked a nationwide audit of private behavioral facilities. 12 were shut down within the year. 47 children were removed from dangerous situations and returned to their families or placed in protective care. Justice was moving, slow and grinding, but it was moving. Yet, as I sat on the porch watching the seasons change, I knew our family was permanently broken. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet of survivors who were grateful to be alive, but mourning the parts of themselves that had died in the process. Margaret Kingsley went to trial 14 months after her arrest, a spectacle that drew national media attention. The prosecution had assembled a mountain of evidence that was impossible to scale. The 47 files Frank and I had photographed, the financial records detailing the selling of children, the testimony from half a dozen shattered families, and the harrowing accounts of the children recovered from the facility. Her defense team, expensive lawyers paid for by liquidating her assets, tried to argue that she was a victim too, that she had genuinely believed Dr. Thomas Thorne's program was a legitimate educational institution and that she had been deceived just as much as the family she recruited. The jury didn't buy it for a second. They saw the emails. They saw the referral fees. They saw the lack of remorse in her cold, hard eyes. She was convicted on 23 counts of child endangerment, 6 counts of conspiracy to traffic minors, and 14 counts of fraud. The judge, a stern woman who seemed visibly disgusted by Margaret's demeanor, sentenced her to 37 years in federal prison. She was 73 years old. It was, for all intents and purposes, a death sentence. When the gavel came down, I waited to feel a surge of satisfaction or perhaps a release of the anger that had been burning in my chest for over a year. But I felt nothing, just a hollow, quiet emptiness. Beside me, Alice cried. She didn't cry because she felt sorry for her grandmother. She cried because the monster under her bed was finally locked away. Dr. Thorne was eventually extradited from Costa Rica and tried separately. He received 45 years. His board of directors received between 8 and 20 years each, and the administrators who had physically carried out the abuse were given life sentences. Claire and I never reconciled. The betrayal was too deep. The canyon between us too wide to ever bridge. She moved to Vancouver shortly after the divorce was finalized, putting thousands of miles between herself, her mother's legacy, and the scandal that had destroyed our family. She still sees Alice every few months, flying back for court-approved visits that are polite, structured, and heartbreakingly distant. Alice calls her Claire now, not Mom. A year after I found her in that cottage, Alice asked if she could talk to her mother outside of the supervised visits. "Are you sure?" I had asked, hesitant to expose her to any more pain. "I think so," she replied. "My therapist says it might help close the door." We met at a park on neutral ground. Claire brought a photo album, pictures of Alice as a baby, as a toddler, on her first day of school. "I want you to know that I loved you," Claire said, her voice trembling as she pushed the album across the picnic table. "That I still love you. What I did was wrong. I was weak, and I was scared, and I let my mother manipulate me. But that is not an excuse. I should have protected you." Alice listened without speaking, her face unreadable. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Claire continued, wiping tears from her face. "But I want you to know that what happened wasn't your fault. You weren't a bad kid. You were never a bad kid. You were perfect, and I failed you." Alice looked at her mother for a long moment, the wind blowing strands of hair across her face. Then she said, simply, "Thank you for saying that. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start, a way to lay the ghosts to rest." 5 years after that night, I came home early from another deployment. The wildfire season had been brutal, but coming home was different now. The house was no longer silent, it was filled with life. Janet, Susan Chang, rather, had published a follow-up piece. The children from Dr. Thorne's facility were all in therapy, Some were doing well, reintegrating into schools and families, while others were still struggling to find their footing. Ethan, the 9-year-old boy who had been transferred overseas, was still missing. It was a jagged piece of the puzzle that refused to fit, a constant reminder of the evil we had uncovered. But the investigation had led to the shutdown of 17 similar facilities across Canada and the United States. Hundreds of children had been removed from abusive situations because we refused to stay silent. Alice, now 16, was thriving. She was resilient in a way that sometimes broke my heart, possessing a wisdom that no teenager should have to earn. She had started a blog about her experience, creating a community for other kids who had survived institutional abuse. She wanted to study psychology at university. To help kids like me, she told me over dinner one night, so they don't have to go through what I did alone. I looked at my daughter, so strong and brave despite everything, and felt my chest tighten with a pride so fierce it hurt. "Your grandmother used to say that comfort makes children weak," I said quietly. I told her she was wrong. Love makes them strong. Alice, and you are the strongest person I know. Alice smiled, a genuine, bright smile that reached her eyes. Thanks, Dad. For what? For coming home early, she said, for not giving up. I think about that night a lot. The what-ifs can keep me awake if I let them. What would have happened if the fires hadn't ended early? If I had come back on schedule 3 weeks later, would Claire have already signed the final papers? Would my daughter have disappeared into that system, shipped overseas like Ethan? Would I have ever seen her again? I can't think about it too much, or the rage threatens to return. Instead, I focus on what did happen. I came home. I found her. I saved her. And she saved herself by being brave enough to tell me about that filing cabinet. Sometimes I wonder if Margaret feels remorse as she rots in that cell. If she lies awake thinking about the children she hurt, the lives she destroyed for a paycheck. I doubt it. People like that don't feel remorse. They feel victimized by the consequences of their own actions. But Alice feels hope, and that is what matters. Last month, on the anniversary of that night, Alice and I drove back to Aurora. We didn't go to Margaret's house. It had been sold years ago to pay her legal fees and was now occupied by a new family who knew nothing of its history. Instead, we went to the conservation land behind it. We hiked out to a clearing near the property line and planted a tree, a white oak. It's a sturdy tree, one that will live for 300 years if it's cared for properly. We packed the dirt down around the roots, our breath misting in the cool November air. For Ethan, Alice said, patting the soil. And for all the kids who didn't make it back, we stood there for a long time, watching the wind move through the bare branches, standing guard over the past while looking toward the future. Then, side by side, we turned and went home.